r/AskReddit by Planet Reddit. Doctors and nurses. What are the weirdest last words you've heard? Not a nurse or doctor, but a grandpa was told that he would die in his sleep that night. When he woke up at 6 AM, he said, "Wow, I'm still here," and then fell back asleep and passed away. At least he got to see the morning one more time. Yeah. But he was actually very accepting of his fate. When he said it wasn't sad, he looked at his wife, laughed, said it. They both laughed together and he just went back to bed. He didn't fear death. He just didn't want to keep on battling cancer, especially at his old age. He remained comedic and happy straight to the end. I remember my aunt telling me as my grandpa was dying. Basically, he had mesothelioma. Started coughing up blood. He just turned to my grandma with a scared look and said, "No, I'm not ready." Come to find out after the fact, what he was most upset about with dying was not being able to watch the grandkids grow up. My brother and cousin were barely out of diapers, and I was the next youngest at 8. That broke my heart more than anything. This isn't the weirdest, but perhaps the one stuck with me the most was a 29-year-old male who said, "I wish there was more" before he went to sleep and passed. This actually made me sad. Damn. Dusty in here. I work as a palliative nurse at a hospital. My patient was slipping in and out of consciousness and would mumble words, but you couldn't understand her. During her last few minutes, she opened her eyes and looked right at me. Alert. She said, "Thank you for coming. I am sorry, but I am going to be poor company. I love you." All I could do was kiss her forehead and tell her that I loved her too. She passed shortly after. I am not sure who she saw standing there, but I am pretty sure it wasn't me. This one brought tears to my eyes. And that never happens. Thank you for doing what you do. Grandma's last words to the nurse on duty was, "Time is not what you think it is." She kept repeating it, then died. They pulled me aside when I arrived and told me how strange and alert her eyes were as she kept repeating the statement about time. I still wonder about this to this day. Maybe she wasn't repeating it. Maybe she only said it once. Time is not what you think it is. An older guy in the town I grew up kept saying to my dad that he thought time was stretching so thin. He died some days later. My dad told me that it was really scary to hear him saying that over and over again. Edit. Words. My mother, a nurse, was in my grandmother's hospital room when she suddenly roused from her comatose state and said, "Oh God. It feels like I was in a coffin. How terrible." And then shut her eyes and fell silent again. She passed away about an hour later. We changed her arrangement so that she was cremated instead of buried. Seemed like the right thing to do. You should have then put her in a tree seed urn so she can come back as a nice tree that sways in the wind and enjoys the awesome freedom of sunshine and air. And then chop her up and make a coffin out of her. Not even a patient, but my grandpa with Alzheimer's. Getting him situated in bed and he has bad knees. Bent it wrong and he said, "If you do that again, I'll punch you in the nuts." I chuckled and let him go to bed. Pressure dropped and he died peacefully in his sleep. Other stuff from him. Like I mentioned, he had Alzheimer's. One day I left my phone on the picnic table and he snagged it as a joke and forgot. I was getting super pissed thinking someone stole it. Called it and he pulled it out of his pocket and couldn't figure out what it was. Asked me what I was going to school for. Told him nursing and he replied, "Knew you looked like a kitten." He used to do this joke before he started slipping where he would stir his coffee and then burn your arm with a spoon as a joke. Well, once he started to slip he would forget he had just done it. So every 3 minutes while you sat next to him he would sneakily burn your arm until you had red marks all down your arm. Brother ended up putting a spoon in his suit jacket at the funeral as we both laughed. That is pretty funny. Sorry for your loss, op. I keep thinking, was your grandfather a South Park fan? Cartman used to say that on the early seasons. My family has a weird sense of humor. My dad called my sister and told her his last words were "turned down for what?" An elderly woman I cared for looked me dead in the eyes and said, "I've wasted my life. I have nothing to show for it. That's it, gone. I have nothing left." The look she gave me was so hollow and hopeless that it made me question my life. she passed away that night. This is my biggest fear. To be at the end, looking back and feeling like I wasted it. Fun fact, but famous author Roald Dahl's almost final words were, "I'm not frightened. It's just that I will miss you all so much," to his family. After falling unconscious, the nurse then injected him with morphine to ease his passing, and he said his actual words, "Ow, duck, only real way to leave." Legendary physicist Richard Feynman came out of his coma apparently to put his arms behind his head to look relaxed and said this dying is boring, before re-entering his coma and later dying. The Feynman point is a sequence of 6 9s that begins at the 762nd decimal place of the decimal representation of pi. It is named after physicist Richard Feynman, who once stated during a lecture he would like to memorize the digits of pi until that point, so he could recite them and quip 999999 and so on, suggesting, in a tongue-in-cheek manner, that pi is rational. Edit. Bonus Feynman playing bongos. Firefighter/paramedic here. I've seen way more than my fair share of active deaths. The 36-year-old we coded last week said, "I'm going down, guys. I'm going down." He went into VFib and didn't come back out of it. I had a man once in the ER who coded and we shocked him and got a rhythm back. He woke up and asked if he died. Then he started crying and said he saw God. Then he coded again. About that fast too. The craziest thing I've ever seen was a skinny woman who went into cardiac arrest, and since it was witnessed, we were able to start compressions immediately. As we compressed her heart, she would wake up and kick us and try to scream. The second we stopped compression, she would go back out. This continued over and over for a good 30+ minutes until the cardiologist ordered us to stop. We had a nurse dedicated to speaking in her ear to try to reassure her and get her to stop kicking. Another crazy one. I had a man witness his own heart stop. He was having an arrhythmia, I'll spare the details, and I had the devil turn towards him in the ambulance. He was watching the monitor as I was treating him and his heart stopped cold. He looked at me with a panic, put his hand on my knee and went down. The poor guy literally watched his own heart stop when he died. The last guy is rather upsetting. Yikes. Imagine seeing the monitor flatline and knowing what's coming to you. Grandfather told me to eat my green beans. Then pass moments later, I eat the duck out of my green beans. Edit for less details. Seeing what username this is. Lady took off the only thing keeping her alive immediately after saying duck it. I'm out. I grinned. I'd want to be in control like that. Like a ducking boss. I have had so many patients say the exact same thing. I just don't feel good. Then bam, dead. The one that bothers me the most is a guy who was having a big heart attack. It was really hectic and my partner and I were trying to get some information, and for whatever reason we kept forgetting his first name. After asking him for a 3rd or 4th time, he looked me dead in the eye and said, "You guys really don't listen to each other." Cue seizure. Coma. Touch. Dead. I now actively ensure I listen a whole lot better. First thing I do is write their first name on my glove. I use tape on the pants. Write vitals and first name. PS. Love your username. Grandpa called us into his bedroom as he was going to sleep after his birthday party. I think I've had enough. 92 is plenty. I won't be here in the morning. I love each and every one of you and you have made my life joyous one. Good night. We all thought he was just losing it. Didn't wake up in the morning. He completely called it. Not a doctor or nurse, but my grandfather's last words while I was sitting with him in the hospital was, "Hey, you know, I enjoyed my life from the womb until the tomb. Maybe I will enjoy the other side." There is a quote from Joseph Campbell's Hero with 1,000 Faces. Full circle we come. From the tomb of the womb to the womb of the tomb. A brief enigmatic journey into the realm of the solid world. Only to melt away like the substance of a dream. Maybe your grandfather read those words once. They've always stuck with me. That's too deep for me. Anus tickler. Edit. Which one of you all depraved individuals gilded my comment about anus tickling? Whoever you are. I like you. Not a doctor, but when my grandma was on her deathbed she had no idea that my uncle had killed himself the night before. Her last words were, "I'm going to see my son now." I got goosebumps when I heard that. Did she know somehow? Or maybe had a dead son no one ever knew about? My great grandma used to call out the names of her dead siblings, never the living. Always the dead ones. In her sleep, and sometimes have conversations with them when she was close to death. Well, one brother died and nobody told her because she was in very poor shape. Living in a home. And nobody thought she could handle it. Then one day she started talking to the brother we never told her had died. She died shortly after. I've heard of that thing happening a lot. There was a woman on TV who was talking about driving to the hospital to see her son who was attacked by a bear. And she said she felt something break inside her, and it was around the same time her son died. Massage therapist here. My first final massage. Well, they are called different things in different places. My first time was with this little old lady that was known to speak her mind. Sweet as hell. But would let you have it. I was giving her a massage with a soundtrack that imitates a cruise line. Since going on cruises was her passion in life. She was breathing short, ragged breaths and finally simply passed on. Her pulse was checked as non-existent. And about 5 minutes later, as the family was talking and dealing with her passing, she breathes, leans up and says, "Oh God, they're so ducking happy up there," and dies all over again. My GF just told me a story of her grandma's last words. Her grandma had a stroke and barely talked anymore. Shortly before she passed, she motioned for my GF to come closer to her. She mouthed words, barely audible, and my GF couldn't understand. So she leaned closer. Still nothing. Leaned closer again. Her grandma smacked her in the head, laughed, and said, "God, yeah." Those were her last words to my GF. I had a patient tell me that his saxophone was broken. I still have no clue what that means. What the hell did you give him, Doc? The blues. While I was attempting to save a man burning to death in a car accident, he sputtered out, "Please God. Not like this. Wish this was fake." On a lighter note, I've been told that Sam Houston's last words were to his wife. From his deathbed. Texas. Marie. Texas. Because. Texas. My worst fear is burning to death. Jesus duck dude, I hope you're okay after the whole burning car thing. My mom's a nurse. Before she got her current hospital job, she used to work at an old folks home. She's got quite a few stories, but the one that sticks out the most is that one of the orderlies came and got her to tell her that one of her residents was looking really weird, pasty white and wide-eyed and not like himself. When she went in, he looked at her and said, "Thank you for coming to see me. I'm going to die now. Have a nice evening." He closed his eyes, coded, and died. The last coherent thing my dad said was it wasn't supposed to be like this. The last noise he made before he died was a weird gaspy cough, and I hated it. Also, duck cancer. I have a humorous one from my favorite patient. A hilarious man who died 3 years ago. He was obese, had diabetes, and for years I was advising him on getting into better shape. He was charming and joked about his problems as opposed to addressing them. Eventually he developed bad leg ulcers as a complication of diabetes and underwent a below-the-knee amputation. When I saw him in the ICU after being extubated after his operation, he struggled to talk, but had to get his greeting in. "Good news, doctor. I've lost weight." Poor guy died 10 minutes later from a massive myocardial infarction. Not a doctor or a nurse, but working EMS. Victim of a car wreck looked me in the eye as we had just extricated her from the vehicle and said, "Tell my daughter." Then lost consciousness. I told her 13 years old daughter that mommy said she loved you very much before she passed. On second thought, this isn't weird at all. It was just really sad. This is really sad. And you did the right thing. I hope I did. I have to believe I did. Otherwise I could never sleep at night. It doesn't matter how many times you do it. It never gets easy talking to the family of a dead person. Not a doctor/nurse. My father's last words were to me. I was the last one to make it in that morning. He told me that if he dies, he wants to respawn in a different place. We had sorta rebonded over Halo 3 in his last few months. He went into a coma a few minutes after waving goodbye to everyone. I still laugh about it from time to time. Took the sadness off a bit. This is awesome. I'm a huge Halo fan. I wish my dad played games like that with me. He was sick and really couldn't play. But he enjoyed the music and battles. Something we could both enjoy. I was raised by my grandmother and great-grandmother. My grandmother died from a swift, from diagnosis of stage 4 1 month. But rather excruciating battle with pancreatic cancer. This was several years ago and I was 21 at the time. I had been married to my wife for 2 years. My wife was young when we met. And we both made a lot of bad decisions back then. We had a son together, he is 7 now, who was a toddler at the time. The last words my grandmother, who was my favorite adult parent for my whole life, said to me was, "Don't trust her paramagnetic." It didn't really affect me at the time. But now 7 years later, about to have my 9th anniversary and my second child with my wife, who has never wavered in her love for me, and me to her, it has been really difficult to reflect back and dwell on the fact that she truly felt that way about my wife. I loved my grandmother dearly. And still do. But often all I can think about when I try to reflect on my time with her is that last statement. And her condition. Visiting every day for several hours and watching someone you are so close to die from cancer is not a pleasant memory. Sorry. Reading all of these made me need to get that out. Thanks for listening if you did. My grandfather talked about going on a road trip and calling my mother Lou. When my mother said, "Okay, I'm going to help you get into bed, Dad," he just looked at her and flat out denied her as his daughter. I guess my point is, it may not have been a moment of clarity for your grandmother. Who knows what she was seeing? Or if it was your wife she was even speaking of. She could have thought you were still with an old girlfriend from years ago or even someone from her past. If your love has never wavered for your wife, trust that. Remember your grandmother for who she was in the years she was alive. And not only in the moments before she passed. Was she heavily medicated when she passed away? It's entirely possible that she was hallucinating or delirious. I once had a patient say, "And no one ever figured me out and then passed." He must have had a hell of a secret. Maybe he meant in a broader sense. Like no one ever knew the real him. I know this isn't exactly what you asked. But I'm not a doctor or nurse or anything. However, when one of my grandpas died, he let out a series of 3 loud, hoarse, and dry screams that I will never forget. Edit. Thank you to those of you that have offered your condolences. It happened a few years ago so I'm mostly over it. That sounds terrifying. It was. Not a doctor. But my grandfather asked his doctor is the order given? And without missing a beat his doctor says the order is given. He died about 5 minutes later. Proud Trekkie till the end. I know it's weird but this teared me up. My grandpa's last words were never work for a Jew. Good old Grandpa Adolf. Hahaha. What a jokester he was. Always threatening to shoot his Jewish neighbor's entire family up. I'm not a doctor or a nurse. But I felt like this belonged here. As my mom was dying she was reaching out calling for her mother who had been dead for over 30 years. She was speaking in her native language. So I could only understand her mom's name. However, the last thing she said in English was, "Oh well." She repeated this dozens of times all while laughing. I'm not sure I could sum up life any better than that. Oh well. Duck cancer. I work in oncology hospice. If any of you have worked in the medical field then you'll know deaths often happen in threes. Not even joking. This one lady was going to be our second death of the evening. I was sitting with her while her family took a break and she kept on looking at the corner chair where no one was sitting. I asked her what she was looking at and she said, "Oh, it's just, due to HIPAA we'll call him Charlie. He's waiting for me, we're going to go together." She never said another word and passed shortly after. It may have seemed like a normal thing because many people see things before they pass, but Charlie was patient number 1 who had passed earlier in the shift. I can't remember my grandma's final words. When she was dying, I sang a song for her that she always sang for me as a little girl. I love my baby Suga. I love that girl right now. Except I sang it as I love my granny Suga. She was in a totally unresponsive state with her eyes frozen open and dried out. When I finished singing to her, a giant stream of tears just flooded out her eyes. I'm glad those were my final words to her. My grandpa on the other hand went into a coma and woke up. He then promptly demanded that I bring him some tacos from the Bell. I explained that this wasn't becoming for a severely diabetic man on dialysis with massive organ failure. He got pissed. I got him tacos. He died happy. Also, screw autocorrect for not liking tacos and sugar. I didn't think I had anything to contribute to this thread, but reading the comments reminded me of something that happened when I was about 18 years old. A couple of friends and I came across a car that had just crashed into a telephone pole at 3 AM on a rural road. The driver had managed to stumble out of the car and flagged us down. I was trained as an EMT and my friends were not. So I ran to the crashed car while my friends called EMS. The passenger and one of the people in the backseat managed to get themselves out of the car. So we had them sit on the curb a bit away from the car. The one girl in the backseat, however, wasn't so lucky. The car had struck the telephone pole right next to where she was sitting, so she had taken the brunt of the impact. By the time I saw her, she had a trickle of blood running down behind her ear and down her neck. Her eyes were glazed over and she was pretty unresponsive. We couldn't move her from the car, so I stayed in the backseat with her and tried to keep talking to her. I managed to get a few words out of her. And I remember the last thing she said to me in this soft, pleading voice was, "I want my mom." She died later that night at the hospital. Those may not have been her last words, but they've stuck with me for years and I still get upset when I think about it. You always hear really nice and almost poetic words from dying people. My grandmother's last words were, "This is so degrading." Pretty grim. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for 3 videos a day.